It is Monday, July 11th at 6:01 for the Common Council meeting at City Hall. Media has been notified. Clerk, take the roll call.
Thomas Kelly.
There we go.
There we go. Thomas Kelly.
Hit it again.
Stephen Jopek.
Microphone isn't working
Here.
worth a damn, but I'm here.
Eileen Daniel.
Here.
Gary Michalowski.
Here.
Gerald Anderson.
Here.
Thomas Barnett.
Here.
David Holt.
Here.
Leanne Felton.
Here.
Chris Hannes.
Here. We have quorum. Let's do Pledge of Allegiance. So some housekeeping on tonight's agenda. I'm going to be swapping the order of 4 and 5. And then underneath 7, it should be 7A, 7B, 7C. And underneath 9, it should be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. It was more just a goof up with typing of the agenda. So for mayor comments, pretty much my comment is regarding we had some water bills go out this last cycle a couple days ago, and there was a glitch where 2 days later everyone got a second water bill. Pretty much the sewage charge was forgotten on the first bill. So everyone who got a second bill, it went up, anywhere from $10 to $50 for the sewage charge side of it. We're going to have a Facebook and website post by end of business day tomorrow to let people know about this. And then I believe, Zach, any fees from people or questions that if they paid the first bills versus the second, that we're going to look at for not having any interest fees, if, for the difference of the two. With that, I'll go to public comment. We have Lauren Sackett.
I wasn't really planning on speaking in public comment, but I figured while out here, I would share. I wanted to thank the city and all of the departments that worked hard on the 4th of July parade and fireworks. We've heard overwhelming great feedback about the day, so I wanted to say thank you. I also wanted to share that tomorrow we are launching our summer Buy Local campaign, urging people to shop locally over the next 4 weeks, 5 weeks or so, in addition to exploring locally, attending local events, and everything like that. So stay tuned to that messaging and feel free to share it. And we are also now accepting applications for the 2022-23 Leadership Oneida County class. We'll have up to 20 participants that we hope to have, and it's a really great way over the course of 9 months, 1 day a month, to learn about the county, learn about the different industries that are within our county, and kind of get in touch with community leaders and network. So I strongly urge anybody that's interested in attending to fill out that application.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Not seeing none. Moving on to 6, consent agenda. Mr. Anderson?
I would ask that A, B, C, and D be removed from the consent agenda.
Could you mic first?
I'd like A, B, C, and D to be removed from the consent agenda.
Would anyone want to second that?
It's not a motion. It doesn't need to be seconded, but I will make a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented with excluding A, B, C, and D.
Is there
I'll second that.
any discussion?
That's where you go.
Not see any. Clerk, take the roll call.
Stephen Jopek.
Aye.
David Holt.
Aye.
Leanne Felton.
Aye.
Thomas Kelly.
Aye.
Gerald Anderson.
Aye.
Gary Michalowski.
Aye.
Eileen Daniel.
Aye.
Thomas Barnett.
Aye.
Motion passes. Now going to 6A. Mr. Anderson?
I'll move approval of the bills and claims in the amount of $1,346,795.49.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Any discussion?
I just didn't think this belonged under consent agenda since each of these usually requires a roll call vote.
I agree. In the past, when we had a consent agenda, we never had the bills and claims on it.
Steve, I defer to you for legal. My understanding is with consent, if we do a roll call vote, it would qualify.
Right. I mean, I would tell you that in several communities where I've also currently served or have served, that the payment of the bills is generally on the consent agenda unless there's an item on the payments that you want to specifically discuss. If there's an item on the payment that you want to specifically discuss, then it's appropriate to take it off. Understand that if you do leave an expenditure item on the consent agenda, then you're going to have to vote by roll call vote, not by voice vote, so that you do have everyone. But it is not unusual to have the bills and payment of bills and expenses on the consent agenda because you all have had a chance to review those before the meeting. And theoretically, if you had a question, you would have raised it, or you'd raise it as a specific question on a specific item. So that's just the common practice in a lot of communities. But you can do whatever you want. I mean, there's nothing magical about it.
Mr. Anderson?
Well, does that apply to the other two items as well? Payments on contracts?
Yes, you can vote, as long as you vote by roll call vote, you can vote to expend money in a consent agenda. And if you have a question on any expenditure, then you should ask to have it removed from the consent agenda if you have a question. But if you already know you're okay with it, because you looked at it, you reviewed it, and you're fine with it, then you can leave it on. The purpose of a consent agenda is to say, I don't have any problem with these items because I've had a chance to look at them. I don't need any further explanation, so let's have it on the consent agenda. A lot of those expenditures are already been discussed. They're already been gone over. They're part of a budget. It's a way of expediting, but if you have a question, then you should take it off the consent and talk about the specific item. But if you're voting on dollar spending, you should vote roll call.
I'm just still more comfortable with a separate roll call on each item.
You do not need a separate roll call unless someone removes it and says they want to discuss it, but you shouldn't just remove it just to vote on it. It should be part of the consent if that's all you're going to do. If you're not going to discuss it, then you should leave it on the consent agenda and vote with a roll call.
Well, or not put it in the consent agenda to start with.
That's an administrative decision.
Mr. Holt?
I'll make a motion to pay the bills in the amount. You already
yeah.
did that?
So,
All right.
no other comment, clerk, take the roll call.
David Holt,
Aye.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek,
Aye.
Carrie Michalowski,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Leanne Felton,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly.
Aye. Motion passes. Moving on to 6B, which is the first pay application for the Hodag stage.
I'll make a motion to approve Hodag Park Stage Pay Application Number 1 in the amount of $100,000, $415.
By
Second.
Daniel, second by Jopek. Any discussion? Not seeing none, clerk, take the roll call.
Leanne Felton,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly,
Aye.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
David Holt,
Aye.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Carrie Michalowski.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to 6C, which is the second pay application.
I'll make a motion to approve Hodag Park Stage Pay Application Number 2 in the amount of $116,141.30.
Felton, second.
Motion by Daniel, second by Felton. Not seeing any discussion, clerk, take the roll call.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly,
Aye.
Carrie Michalowski,
Aye.
David Holt,
Aye.
Leanne Felton,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek.
Aye.
Motion passes. Clerk, just to clarify, is D still needing to be voted on? Correct, right? Yes. Okay, so I would entertain a motion for 6D, which is the council meeting minutes.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes from the June 27th, 2022 council meeting.
Daniel, second.
Any discussion? Mr. Anderson?
Under item 6A, I had asked at the last meeting that Mr. Sorensen's explanation be included, and it was not. So I'd like to move to amend by saying that, putting in parentheses after the word present, negotiate possible conveyances with, I guess probably belongs in there too. So that's the explanation of what present means in that motion.
Is there a second? Well, he made the motion, so we're seconding.
Oh, second. Joe Beck seconds.
Yeah. Let me first refer to Steve. Are you okay with that since it's tied to your name?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Jopek?
So just to clarify, so what you're asking is that the statement present the adjacent properties is unclear, and so using alternate language that makes it more clear of what the government is doing in this circumstance.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Any further discussion? Not seeing any. Clerk, take the roll call.
Vote on the amendment first.
We don't need a roll call.
We're going to divide. We're going to roll call.
Okay.
So on the amendment first.
David Holt,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Carrie Mikulowski,
Aye.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly,
Aye.
Leanne Felton.
Aye.
Amendment passes. Now on the motion. No discussion. Clerk, take the roll call.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Leanne Felton,
Aye.
Carrie Mikulowski,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly,
Aye.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
David Holt,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to 7 ordinances. So this was mainly a cleanup of some wording we have in 2 different ordinances. Went through Planning Commission a couple weeks ago. There was no public comment regarding this. I refer to Zach with any other comments.
I'm just going to draw your, draw your attention to the handout that was shared within your packets. There were some minor cleanup and some missed bolding of text to indicate what's the new language versus the previous language. And as the mayor alluded to, and as you saw in the report from the Plan Commission, this was unanimously recommended to the council for adoption to clean up 2 sections in the zoning and abandoned, junked, or dismantled motor vehicles ordinances.
So we could either approve as is, we could waive the second reading if we choose, or take no action up to council.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented and waive the second reading.
Barnett.
Anderson, second.
Okay, any discussion? Mr. Jopek?
Are we referring to ordinance 2022-08, like section 2? So 4.03 the one that was separate from the packet, like it was handed in? Okay.
Yeah, there was some reordering just in terms of consistency. 403 came first, now 507.
Okay.
I spent some time with Gerald on Friday going through the text on this and
Yeah.
getting it buttoned up tight.
The last sentence under 4.03.05, it says also the vehicle owned by a person actively serving in the armed forces may be stored in the rear yard of residential property while on active orders for, and it crosses out the 10-year of service deployment. Just to be clear, we're not delineating between someone who is, say, stationed in Korea for 2 years, because that's not always considered a deployment from spot to spot. So I just want to make sure active duty soldiers don't suddenly have their cars, violating permits.
Yeah, and I would say that this is probably a very unique ordinance to have municipal reference to this type of line of work specific to this, at least in the municipal codes that have been floated around in the last number of years. And I was not a part of the early conversations at the Plan Commission if that was a consideration. I think Carrie might have been on there prior to that, but it really was the consultant had that in their text for us. So I don't believe there was a local desire to have that inclusion in there. In fact, Gerald and I talked about that section could stay or go. It's just
Okay.
trying to make sure the intent is clear, because there were conflicts between the text, the first one and then the second one, about what was active orders, what was deployment. I
Yep.
mean, you're hitting on the crux of the question.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, referencing, I mean, if it may be something along active duty, stationed somewhere abroad, because when I read deployment and the 10-year of service, to me, a 10-year of service would be as long as you're stationed in, Germany or something. A deployment would be like in the Middle East, Africa, so on and so forth. So I guess just making sure we're not throwing active duty soldiers under the bus should they be in a situation where they have to store their vehicles in the back of their parents' house or what have it. So,
Mr. Anderson?
I just wanted to ask Mr. Sorensen if there's any state statute that bears on this. I couldn't find one.
There isn't. This is subject to local ordinance. There's no state statute that would govern the junk vehicles, nor a state statute that would define the difference between active duty and deployment. So they have to have local meaning.
Not seeing any discussion. Clerk, take the roll call.
Carrie Mikulowski,
Aye.
David Holt,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek,
aye.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Leanne Felton,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly.
Aye.
Ordinance passes. Moving on to 7B, I refer to Zach.
Many of you will recall last year the Snowmobile Club came to us because Menominee Street had not been in the ordinances as an allowed street to be run for snowmobile traffic. Council last year took action via resolution, which was really a one-year agreement, and the club wanted to pursue something more permanent. So in your, as an attachment, because the header had some typos in it, the addition of Menominee is in there. So I'm just going to get to that page. It's 22 in your packet, though. Again, that's got the header for a different ordinance. So the attached item that was distributed separately is clear. The only change that they're seeking is under 3, the addition of F, having Menominee Drive from North Stevens to Apache Lane be included. I will say a couple things. The first of which, 4A will present a conflict to be considered, and I'm not sure exactly if there's an alternative that can overcome that, but there's some state statute references on snowmobiles operating with the flow of traffic and not into the flow of traffic. So that one might be a little bit impossible to get around, I guess is my point. And then we also talked about, since this is an ordinance, that it will have a public hearing associated with it, and we'll want to notify all those adjacent property owners, because that will directly impact. I mean, there's a lot of driveways on Menominee. I've contended that it's not the most ideal, and I'm not sure if there's a good alternative, but it's what's sort of existing there today. And so I think it's a tough spot for the city to be in order for that connection to remain. So just wanted to bring it before you all tonight. We're going to send out a letter if you concur that we're going to continue down this path. But if you don't want us to continue, then we need to know that too.
Mr. Anderson?
As I recall, last year we talked about this, and there were going to be some negotiations and efforts to try to find alternatives, but we allowed it for 1 year because we didn't have an alternative ready. Does that mean that nothing has come of those efforts?
When the mayor and I met with them to discuss what was prepared as concepts, I would call them, they clearly and plainly articulated that none of those would work for them. And so that they wanted to pursue back this avenue and path.
Mr. Barnett?
Yeah, I remember that conversation quite well from last year. There was also damage being done to the roads, I believe. So are they, as a snowmobile group, are they offering to at least help with the damage of the road as far as their group fundraising to pay for the damage of the road, or are we just expected to say, okay, that's fine, you guys couldn't find something else, so the taxpayers will pay for the road?
Yeah, on the material that was going to be put on the roadway, we had looked at having that incorporated with the Stevens Street project, though the cost would probably be more substantial than if we were to do it alone. They have contended again that they wouldn't pay for, their statements were that no snowmobile club in the state pays for those things. Now, I would say that that happens on state highways. The state DOT picks up the cost, but this is a local street, so
Right.
it would become the city's responsibility then. And they contended that they wouldn't be paying for any material. That would be our decision to put that on the roadway if we wanted to protect it. I don't have a good assessment, full assessment. The engineer was going to look at it when he was back in the office this week just to give us do we have a degradation issue on the Stevens Street crossing? Because if there is, we should know that. If nothing else, be prepared to maybe add the material on the roadway as well.
What are the risks associated with having snowmobiles going down that road with all those driveways?
I don't want to step in public safety's feelings, but I mean, there are concerns that if our ordinance, for sending snowmobiles in a direction and opposing traffic, that might, to me, would present a concern, but I don't know, speed is probably a bigger factor. If people are traveling, as the ordinance states, within a certain speed, I think it's 10 miles an hour at certain hours and then 15 miles an hour outside of those. I mean, that's probably more of a consideration than maybe the traffic direction.
Would they be violating any kind of noise ordinance for those residents?
That's a question. I again look to the chief, because if somebody's got a loud,
Oh, they're loud.
loud
It don't
engine,
matter
I mean,
what
I'm
you
just
got,
thinking
they're loud.
if they've got a souped up nonstop
Yeah.
machine, probably. I mean, the decibel, I'm not an expert in that area.
They're really going to be no different than the city has opened all that area up to ATVs, UTVs.
Okay.
So that's another recreational vehicle. Just like you have some UTVs are louder than others. Same with snowmobiles. In the wintertime with snowbanks, people tend to be more cautious anyways when the heights of those gets built up. But people are being more and more used to the smaller vehicles, ATV, UTVs being on the road. Even in the wintertime, people utilize them for transportation, so I'm not concerned about that.
Mr. Chopik?
Chief Guthier, last year, were there any experiences, to your knowledge, where this was detrimental to the community? There were instances of, disobeying the ordinance, disobeying the law, those kind of things that could make that neighborhood, that could be problematic for that neighborhood from the snowmobiling group, or even the ATVs for that matter?
We had 0 complaints, 0 issues. It's not extremely heavily traveled, but it is a trail.
Mr. Holt?
Thank you. I wanted to get a clarification on the idea between, or the distinction between causing road damage and increasing wear, which is shortening the length or the lifespan of a roadway, right? To me, causing damage is an acute thing. And does that mean we're going to have to do repairs every spring when you have a thaw because of snowmobile traffic? Or does it simply mean that a road that we would expect to last, or that section of road is going to last a certain percentage of time less than the road around it? Because the cost to the city is incurred in a different way for those two. So I don't know who could answer that question, but
Yeah,
I think
we've
it's an
done
important
some
distinction.
Yeah, it is. We did some documentation with some photos and such that we don't have the full picture, so I can come back to you with that information, because there might be some additional spalling. That concrete is sealed at both the curb and the sidewalk, and I think there was some concern that studded tracks were causing some pitting and that kind of stuff. So I think there's a question there that should be answered with a little bit more information than what I've got prepared, at least an initial draft tonight.
Ms. Daniel?
2 points. The first one is, would it cost more to put on that protective white, or would it cost more to repair the road? That's, maybe we should do a cost comparison to see whether it behooves us to go ahead and spend the money to protect it, so we're not having to go back and reseal it. Sure. Second thing is, my only concern is that's a very busy road all year long, and crossing 4 lanes of traffic seems like a danger to both the snowmobilers and the car traffic on that road. I just wanted to put that statement out there.
True. Mr. Anderson?
It seems like another conflict in this situation is that in general, we're interested in clearing snow off of streets. And yet, ideally, the snowmobilers need snow to operate. And when I think about that, I think, well, if they're on the far right side, can we leave snow there? Well, not if we're crossing a bunch of driveways, I don't suppose.
I would, and Zach, if you don't agree, just let me know. I would say we're going to plow that street like we do every year. We're not going to change plowing habits based on the group's use.
It's my understanding we have made accommodations to retain certain snow there, but whether or not it gets cleared by the private property owners, so it might just be in between the driveways. But I know that plowing activity, and I know the town that takes care of Shawnee is also considered some of that, though it probably travels more off the road in Shawnee than it would in Menominee, because a lot of that's paved right-of-way that's being used for private use, which is another concern or issue, I guess, to contend with.
Mr. Jopek?
Could you clarify, you guys said that you'd mentioned in your meeting with the Snowmobile Club that alternatives were given to them, but they did not want them. Can you clarify the reason that they did not want them? Is there something standing in the way, or is, I guess,
sure.
I'm curious what their standing is for why not the alternative as opposed to this.
Yeah, they all come with effort, whether it's notifying and reaching out to get permission from property owners, potentially some utility conflicts where utility poles or utility, and so more wrapping of those types of conflicts. Trying to think of the other reasons.
There was also the concept of getting the snow grooming machine down. Some of the other options would be very hard based on the amount of space needed for height and width of machine.
Yeah. And we can share the packet that was shared previously so you have some context for that.
Hot topic. Ms. Daniel?
I'm wondering if there's a way to, much like we do a traffic study, and have some way of knowing how many snowmobiles are actually using that crossing. I mean, maybe it's a non-issue. Maybe there's, maybe under 50 a year that are actually going to use that. So is there a way to count snowmobiles much like we count cars? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly do some sort of recording, probably some video recording to get some data. I would say that this crossing will become more important when the hotel is operating next year. That's going to be a big concern, I think, for all, just in terms of measurement. This winter will be no comparison for the following.
Mr. Anderson?
Did I understand, Zach, that we're going to get some kind of report from engineers next meeting?
Yeah, just in terms of the Stevens Street roadway condition, we didn't send them in a direction to start designing or engineering any routes, though it seemed like the club thought that was the council's determination last year, and we informally said we would discuss those things, but we weren't going to send our engineer loose on designing a trail or defining a trail for them.
But given that and Ms. Daniels' comment, it seems to me that maybe what we ought to do is approve it for another year before we make it permanent and do that kind of study.
Sure. Yeah, I think that those are reasonable considerations that we need your direction on.
Zach, what would you guess the study would cost?
I just have to figure out how we're collecting it. I mean, there's ways to do so probably without a lot of effort.
And what was the seal coating rough guesstimates? About 15,000?
Yeah, I would say so.
So if a study is going to be cost of the seal coat, is it worth it?
Yeah. I think it'd be good to collect some data, but I don't think we need to spend a ton of money on a study. Cool. That would be my recommendation.
So pretty much we're looking how to go forward. If you want us to do it as amendment to the ordinance, or do we want to do it as a 1 year and then come back? Kind of we're looking for direction. Ms. Daniel?
Well, I'm thinking this is just the first reading of this ordinance, and so we have some time between this one and the next one. I'm assuming, like you said, you're going to be reaching out to the property owners in that area, letting them know so that there's a public hearing that they can attend, and so they know it's coming.
Cool.
Yeah, and that may inform the decision too, potentially.
So since we kind of did this backwards, I would entertain a motion.
And you don't need them, just the fact that we had a reading on it.
Oh, we don't for first reading?
Yeah.
Cool. We don't do many two reading amendments since I started, so. Okay, moving on to 7C. So this is a unique one. This is land that the city owns that is not part of the city. So this would be, I refer to Zach to see how we go about making this part of the city.
I took a screenshot of the property that I'm going to make sure I'm looking at. So the one Eileen is holding, which has the Driscoll Road Apartments, is not this item. That's a later item on here. That's 9E, though it should be 9C, I think, ABC.
Correct.
So you can save that one. But there in your email was an attachment for, it's essentially Hanson Lake. There's a small property there at Hanson Lake that the city owns outright. Most of the city-county properties are dual ownership. This one is not, according to the GIS records anyway. We're still waiting to get the tax parcel, tax ID, because the ordinance isn't fully ready until we get that, and we couldn't get it discovered last week by the packet printing. So again, first reading, just want to make sure city-owned. It's pretty straightforward from a petition process and that to get this annexed, though there is a city-county parcel, very small one right next to it, that's also an island that should be addressed at the same time. So we may not bring this back at the next meeting if I'm hoping that we could have some direction from you to encourage the city and the county to work out a joint petition for that other remaining parcel that's currently outside the city's jurisdiction but is adjacent to this.
Miss Daniel?
You said this is out by Hanson Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Is this right next to the airport?
It's very near the airport, yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Mr. Barnett?
Did we skip over reports of boards, commissions, and committees?
You approved them in the consent.
Correct.
Oh, that was the thing left on the consent? Okay,
Correct.
I was thrown by it. Thanks.
So Zach, what direction are you looking from the body?
Yeah, ideally it would be, you don't have to take the action on the first reading, but yeah, bring it back for a second reading, but at the same time, so you can get the full text of the ordinance, but also to direct us to work with the joint owner, the county, to annex the other parcel as well.
So are you technically looking for a motion to direct administration?
Yep.
Mr. Anderson?
Okay, I move that we direct the administration to proceed with the proposed annexation of the CR 10-1A and the adjacent parcel if possible.
Second. Jopak, second.
Any discussion? Not seeing none. That doesn't have to be a roll call, right, technically?
No.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to 8A. Zach?
Yeah, I'll start this off and then I can kick it over to Steve or he and I can both take questions as well. You don't have text for the agreements because we literally were still meeting with the group this afternoon to talk through outstanding concerns. I can fairly confidently state we have a kind of a tentative agreement. There are some attorney details between both parties that still need to get worked out, as well as some final exhibits, though the exhibits have really been the same all the way through the Planning Commission process. It's just making sure that the public improvements are defined from the private. So all in all, we have a tentative agreement with the same parameters that the council sent us in months ago as we began our discussions in closed session on that side of things. And which is also carried forward in our TIF and TID development, the TID creations here tonight. So that would be my update. I don't know, Steve, if you have any further comments in either instance on 8A or B, but there is some question about whether or not are we executing something that without those details, so maybe you can address that.
I would tell the board or the council and the public that anything that's left right now is in the form of, well, there's two major issues. One, I think we resolved this afternoon, that deals with guarantees and support by the investors. The other issue that we're dealing with is simply getting some more detail on the plans, but there's nothing substantial or anything that I would consider that would hinder us from moving forward. It's right in line. It's just typical two lawyers reading the contract and one liking one word versus one liking a different word. And just so you all know, I basically said, you know, as long as it protects the city, I don't care which word you use. So we're not going to spend a ton of time, but we do have some small items we have to clear up before the final draft is done. But I expect that'll be done very, very shortly on both contracts. There's nothing really going to stop these projects now other than something we could never imagine.
Ms. Daniel?
I'd like to move to table 8A and B till the next meeting. I have a hard time approving something I haven't seen.
Is there a second?
Joe Peck, second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
With that, I, however, want everyone to understand that we've tentatively told the parties that they can continue to proceed. So if this council has any hesitation with that, we better make that known tonight, because we're all proceeding. Okay, thank you. I just want to make that clear.
Anyone opposed? Not seeing none. Table pass. Going on to 9A. Refer to Zach.
So in your packet on page 24, there's some information pertaining to these financial agreements. The state is planning on redoing 17 from 8 to Stevens Street next year. And as part of that original agreement, when the bypass was constructed, the city took on a number of obligations, though, you know, it's kind of, for a state highway of that sort, for a city size Rhinelander, comes with a lot of expectations. But so far, we've been able to meet those expectations, and what our cost associated with this is for some water utility structures in the vicinity. And so, again, have to turn this around for DOT's purposes, and happy to answer any other questions if there are any.
So what is this actual work being completed from the city side?
It's not actually the city performing the work, it's through the project itself, but it's to facilities, sewer inlets that we are responsible for maintaining. So that's where the line gets drawn. So it's $12,650 in total.
What's the rough age of the current infrastructure?
I don't know. I don't know when it was constructed.
So bypassed probably 20 to 30 years?
Yeah, none of this.
Mr. Jopek?
Just a clarification under proposed improvement, nature of work. The second paragraph, it says the existing sidewalk on the west side of US Highway 8 between Lincoln Street and Stevens Street will be widened to provide a multi-use pathway.
That's correct.
That it's supposed to be Highway 8. Shouldn't that be 17?
The west side, yeah, it should say that. You're right, State Highway. I think they copied the limits, which is 8 to Stevens Street, but should be the west side of 17.
Okay.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure so I knew, like,
Where we were
picturing
talking,
where,
yeah,
where
for
it's
sure.
going to be.
Yeah, I didn't catch that.
Appreciate
when
it.
I read it before.
Would entertain a motion, Mr. Anderson?
I move that we approve the state municipal financial agreement for a portion of Highway 17 rehab not to exceed $12,650 in local share.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Holt.
Clerk, take the roll call.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Gary Mikulowski,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly,
Aye.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
David Holt,
Aye.
Leanne Felton.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to 9B, discuss Hodag ATV Club, portion of Kemp Street. Refer to Zach.
The city received this request from the Hodag ATV Club. In looking at our ordinance further, really the only exemption or exclusion, which I think a number of you were also on the council when the city expanded that scope, and the chief probably has some additional feedback if necessary, but the only thoroughfare corridor that's excluded by ordinance from ATV, UTV traffic is Lincoln Street. So it was unclear, I guess, to us as to why this request was being made of the city, but we put it on our agenda tonight just so we can have some discussion, and we'll go back to them with any clarification from there.
Mr. Anderson?
I sort of agree with that as what's the need, but is there a distinction here between designating it as a trail apart from merely allowing it to happen on that street? Is the designation of a trail an issue?
And we don't normally get into that, and you can kind of see their application they use is for the county's system. So, you know, I think part of why I want to bring on the agenda is if there's been any concerns that we discuss those. But as of now, no, I don't think there's any, unless there's a state map trail designation that I don't think the city would play a role other than providing that all of our local streets are available with the exception of the one.
Mr. Barnett?
I make a motion to direct Zach to continue the conversation with the Hodag ATV Club and get clarification as to what they would like the city council to approve.
Hold second.
Any more discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. 9C, so this is a unique one. This is a small island of land in the city limits that is owned by the town of Pelican. It used to be a right-of-way. So we're pretty much asking that you want us to pursue to acquire this land from the town of Pelican.
Barnett, I make a motion to approve the quitclaim deed of the town of Pelican for RH-9104-0703.
Is there a second?
Mikulowski, second.
Any discussion? Not seeing none. For this one, clerk, take the roll call.
Leanne Felton,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
Carrie Mikulowski,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek,
Aye.
David Holt.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to 9D, refer to Zach.
We've got Sean from Ellers here tonight to cover more of an update. I don't think a number of you were at the Joint Review Board or at the Planning Commission level by virtue of your appointments on those, but now we're at the formal final stage of adopting the resolutions for the creation of the tax increment districts, both 11 and 12. So associated with that is the resolution, the project plan, and the boundaries. And Sean, I'll let you come to the podium if there's any other framing.
And Zach, just to make it clear, if this body approves this, does it come back, or is this the end of the road for this body?
Sure. There's another stop on the journey, and that's back with the Joint Review Board, and that's the 2nd of August, I believe, was the date.
But this body would then be that
Right.
part fulfilled?
Right, and Sean can clarify anything further on that, but that's correct.
Yeah, that is correct. What I was going to take the council through is this handout, which hopefully everyone's gotten a copy of this.
Page 37 is the resolution, but Sean, I don't think they've got the briefer, the one you just held up. We've got the Joint Review Board, one from that meeting.
Yeah, it's pretty much verbatim.
Okay.
We didn't have any changes
And
there.
we can run some additional copies of that.
Yeah, I apologize I should have brought some. Yeah.
Could you, Austin, can you run and grab those? Do you know which one it is? It should be from Paula. Okay, thanks.
And maybe, if it's okay, I can talk about the first couple pages, Zach, which
Yep,
are
that'd be
more
great.
general tax increment in nature. So for those of you that aren't familiar with tax increment financing, it's a tool, and it's probably the predominant tool in Wisconsin that cities and villages primarily use to promote economic development or redevelopment in your community. And the way tax increment works is you identify an area in your community that you'd like to see development or redevelopment occur, and then that ends up becoming the boundaries of the tax increment district. And once you've determined those boundaries, the next step that Ellers worked on with city staff is determining what's the current valuation from tax purposes of that property that you're proposing to put into the tax increment district. And the reason you want to calculate that is that value is the base value of the district, and in past years, that value has collected taxes, and then it goes to all the different taxing jurisdictions. So the city gets their share, school, county, and the tech college. When the council approves a tax increment district, that base value then gets frozen for that area, that property that you're putting into the special taxing district. The base value, taxes on that base value continue to go to all the taxing jurisdictions. No change there. But any new value up and above the base, the city gets 100% of that new value tax revenue. So you're getting all of the jurisdictions' shares. But the limitation is that that revenue needs to be geared toward economic development and redevelopment initiatives in that area. And that can be infrastructure improvements, redo, site grading, cash grant, business incentives, pay-as-you-go incentives. Maybe I'll just talk about that for a second. That's where you enter into an agreement with a party that says if you create this new value and you pay your taxes, over time we'll pay you back some of that new tax revenue that you created. You, Mr. or Mrs. Developer, you can use that money to pay yourself back for some of your upfront costs. Could be site grading, could be some infrastructure improvements, could be a number of variables. So the way that the tax increment district works is then when you get that new revenue stream from the new development, the city uses that to pay back the costs through the life of the district. The two that we're talking about tonight, one is a blight district, that's TID 11. That has a maximum term of 27 years. And then the other district is mixed use. That has a maximum term of 20 years. You don't have to go to the end of the life, but you can for the tax increment district to pay back the costs. And then at the end of the life of the district, after all those costs have been paid back that you incurred as a city to promote development and redevelopment, then that tax base up and above the base value, so let's say it's 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, whatever it might be, that tax base now shifts back and becomes part of the tax base of the city's general fund, the school district, the tech college, and the county. So those other taxing jurisdictions, while the TIF is in place, they're not capturing that revenue. But what their thought is right now we're not getting anything or much of anything anyway. If the city goes forward with this redevelopment plan, in the long run, after those costs are paid back to get that redevelopment moving forward, we're going to get that extra tax base, and that'll help us down the road and expand the tax base for all the jurisdictions. Okay. So in general, that's how it works for overall purposes. While we're still waiting on the copies, what I might start to do is just talk to you a little bit about the two districts. Both of the districts, the initial projects that have been brought before the city, I think you're familiar, alluded to some of the development agreements already this evening. You guys did a study related to hotels in Rhinelander, and you really think the study came back and said you have a lack of that. Would be good to try to promote that, to serve the public, and increase tourism, those sorts of activities. So both of these districts, the initial projects that are occurring are related to new hotels. In TID number 11, we're talking about the Cobblestone project, and that tax increment district is a blight district on the far, this will be the west side of the community as you come in, and it incorporates right around the river, the flowage there on both sides. The other project that's the primary redevelopment project in TID 11 is one that we worked on last year but hasn't moved forward yet, but is still out there, is the Riverview Estates redevelopment project as well. And then the hope is with that activity and some other activity, we may see continued redevelopment in and around that area of the city going forward. Numbers wise, we are looking at the development from the Cobblestone, the potential reopening and restarting of the Riverview Estates. That's going to create that revenue to pay back both incentives and other costs of the TID over the life of the tax increment district. And as of right now, with the financial model that's in the project plan that I think everyone had a copy of as well, we expect that that can be repaid over that 27-year life maximum of the district. One thing I would encourage the council to do, and we work with Zach and Wendy, as a matter of fact, we just recently had a meeting about this, is when you set up these districts, they're set up for the purposes of being able to use this as a tool. What you want to be most sensitive to, in my opinion, is the implementation of the TIF, the project plan implementation. And what that's attempting to do is make sure you're not getting out ahead of your skis, so to speak, where you're spending dollars that you don't know you're going to get development to occur. When you have those sorts of situations, that's really where you run the risk that if the TIF isn't successful, the city has to make the difficult decision of using other funds of the city to pay your expenses, hopefully just in the short run, and then in the long run, they'll be able to be paid back to you. But the main goal is every year monitoring the TID, and then anytime a project comes before the council is getting and receiving information about how is the TID doing, and do we feel confident that if we move ahead with this project, we're going to get the revenues from the district to be able to pay it back. And that would be our intent on the implementation for both of these districts going through each of their lives. And on that point, I'd also mention there are a number of incentives and infrastructure projects included in both of these plans, but they by being in the plan, allow the city to use tax increment financing or revenues to pay the project back. But in and of themselves, by being in the plan, it doesn't mean you've approved them. You still will go through your normal process to approve those projects. And that's where I would again highlight, that's where you want to have information on how is our tax increment district doing? Do we have the necessary funds to be able to pay everything back? Okay. TID number 12 is on the east side, I think the northern east side of the city, on Chippewa and just south of, I think, Stevens, right, is the location there, if I'm not, if I'm remembering correctly. This project is on both sides of Chippewa. The one side is 6 lots for commercial development, the immediate project being the hotel project out in that area. On the east side, that project is potentially looking at commercial along Chippewa and then maybe residential behind it, a little bit off of Chippewa. So this district is a mixed use district for development of commercial, industrial, and potentially residential all in the area. As I'd mentioned, the first phase here, just like in TID number 11, is the development of a hotel in that area. And that project, I believe, is ongoing or is ready to go. In the short run here, you do have an agreement you're finalizing related to that. And in this district, the city is using a combination of some city-issued debt, also the pay-as-you-go model approach. So if as a reference, folks, we're looking currently at these 2 pages, TID 12, preliminary development and increment assumptions, and then cash flow. The preliminary expectation on the hotel development in TID 12 is somewhere around 8.7 million in value. And then what's being asked of the city and asked of the TIF for that first phase is assistance with paying for the infrastructure. So the city would issue debt that would be backed by the full faith and credit of the city. You would have the revenues of the TID pay that annual payment on the debt first, so that would be at the front end. And then there's a secondary, what we again call a pay-as-you-go incentive, that if the developer creates sufficient revenues to first pay the annual payment on the city debt, The remaining revenues would annually be appropriated to them up into a maximum amount to pay back for some on-site costs that they have. That's the incentive side. But again, we want the city's debt in that primary position to make sure that that's getting paid. And I believe you're going to have some shortfall agreements and other things as a part of the development agreement overall. So this TID is going to be a combination of some infrastructure improvements with city debt as well as that pay-as-you-go incentive in the first phase. Future phases, again, hopefully we'll see additional commercial development in and around the hotel, as well as some potential residential on the east side of the proposed boundaries of TID number 12. Okay. Overall, timeline-wise, we had back in June an initial meeting of the Joint Review Board that's made up of all the taxing jurisdictions, and the mayor sat on that representing the city. There was also a fifth member selected, an at-large member to represent the public. We talked about this information with that group, and as Zach said earlier, if the council moves ahead today, they will meet for a second time on August 2nd, and they also get a vote on the creation of both of these tax increment districts. The Planning Commission public hearing also occurred on June 21st, the same day as that Joint Review Board meeting. And the Planning Commission voted to move forward the TID 11 boundaries, the TID 12 boundaries, and the project plans for both to the City Council today. So what's before you for action tonight, should you want to proceed with the creation of both of these districts and move that process forward, is approval of resolutions creating the boundaries and approving the project plan for TIDs 11 and 12. And again, if the council chooses to do so, then we'll have that final meeting on August 2nd with the Joint Review Board, which I defer to Zach on this too and the mayor, but I think it was a very good discussion with them. Lots of questions, but I think in general, they seem very supportive of what the city was doing.
Correct.
Yep. So I know I threw a lot of info at you, and you guys did get the handout as we were going through it, but if there's any questions before taking action on the resolutions, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
So I have two, just to be clear for members in the audience and everyone. So from a taxing body, meaning the city, the county, the school districts, the city is taking 100% the liability of making this from a debt point of view of the district, correct?
Yeah, if you as a city, and let's take the TID 12 mayor as an example. In the development agreement negotiations, they're asking you to issue debt to finance the infrastructure. The expectation is we're going to use the new hotel tax revenue to pay that debt.
Correct.
In a worst case scenario where we're not able to collect on shortfall payments, the development agreement, they don't pay because they're in bankruptcy or something, and Steve could talk about these risks. At the end of the day, to your point, Mayor, it's the city that has to pay that obligation back, not the other taxing jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. So you are the point of the spear on the economic development initiatives, but what the other jurisdictions are providing to the city is that if the hotel builds and the new tax revenue comes in, they won't collect any of it until the TID closes, and the city can use both your share of that revenue as well as all the other jurisdictions to pay it back, to pay the debt back. But in the worst case, if at the end of the life of the TID, there's a shortfall of $1,000, the city is the one who has to pay that $1,000.
So then the flip side, the city gets a very strong development agreement that protects the city due to we're taking on this liability for this district.
Exactly. The scenario I'm talking about is the worst case scenario, correct. But you're doing all the steps necessary with the city attorney right now to try to lock in an agreement that positions the city in as riskless as you can possibly be. There's always some, but you're trying to do it in a way that positions you to have as little risk as possible. The
second question would be with the boundaries of the district, how often can we change those during the life of the district?
During the life of the tax increment district, you can do up to 4 boundary amendments for your tax increment district. The only caveat to that, Mayor, is if the city took all your tax increment districts and all of the value in it, and we divided it by the whole value of the city, If that number is greater than 12%, then you can't do boundary
max.
amendments. But you're not currently in that position.
Cool. Thank
So
you.
4.
Mr. Jopek?
I'm new to city government and all those things, so pardon me for being a layman, but so would this, in your experience, does this increase interest from other developers to come into that area because we might have a little bit more leeway to aid them in developing that infrastructure or whatnot? Like, is that I guess I'm trying to present the most obvious benefit to the city and the constituents, is that this could possibly invite development beyond the hotel and all those things. Like, we could offer, the ability to install infrastructure stuff, offer that debt, in the future, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that's exactly right. So I think a couple things, if I was a developer, the city creating a TIF is a signal that this is an area of focus for Rhinelander for development and redevelopment initiatives. And then your second point is spot on too. The same tools that you're talking about using for both of these hotel projects, you could put to work for other projects in the city or in the TIF.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not just limited to these first phases. You can use it in other instances as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Also, in these two particular developments is also room tax and frap tax that would be added to the bottom line too as additional benefit. Okay, not seeing any discussion. I will move on. We have to, of course, take them one at a time, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the first TID.
Holt, I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
So that would be TID number 11, just
Yes,
for clarification.
TID number 11.
And I would just offer for clarification, if I could, Mr. Chair, to include the resolution, the project plan, and the boundaries, just the text, those three included in your motion, please.
Want me to repeat that?
Yes, just for clarification.
Okay. All right. I'm moving to approve a resolution creating tax increment district number 11, approving its project plan and establishing its boundaries.
Is there a second?
Jopek, second.
Any discussion? All those, clerk, take the roll call.
Thomas Kelly.
Aye.
Stephen Jopek.
Aye.
Eileen Daniel.
Aye.
Carrie Mikulowski.
Aye.
Gerald Anderson.
Aye.
Thomas Barnett.
Aye.
David Holt.
Aye.
Leanne Felton.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to 9E, which would be very similar, just a different TID number.
Jopek move to approve resolution creating tax incremental district number 12, approving its project plan and establishing its boundaries.
Is there a second?
Daniel, second.
Any discussion? Not seeing none. Clerk, take the roll.
Stephen Jopek.
Aye.
David Holt.
Aye.
Leanne Felton.
Aye.
Thomas Kelly.
Aye.
Gerald Anderson.
Aye.
Carrie Mikulowski.
Aye.
Eileen Daniel.
Aye.
Thomas Barnett.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to 9F, refer to Zach.
I know we've got quite a few projects park-related of the sort happening, but we've gotten some questions from community members, and this pertains to the splash pad development at Pioneer Park. The city also received a tentative gift, I would say, that had some expectations associated with time frame on that gift. And just kind of walking back a schedule of events from my experience, we need to initiate at least the first step in that process, which would be the solicitation of qualifications for like developments or engineers, architects, the combination thereof. So that at this point in time, wanted to affirm, one, that this is a priority yet for the city, two, to get initiated at this time, and to solicit qualifications so then we can begin an evaluation of those qualifications and get someone under contract to design and then ultimately put together a budget or a scope for a splash pad at Pioneer Park.
Daniel, I'll make a motion to direct administration to solicit qualifications for the development of a splash pad at Pioneer Park.
Mikulowski, second.
Any discussion? Mr. Anderson?
Okay, what is a splash pad?
It's a glorified spray pad of like a fountain that would get plumbed in water. Yeah, it's a youth activity.
Think mini water park kind of thing, like a little tiny area for kids to run around and jump in the water and go crazy.
Any other discussion? Okay, not seeing any other discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to 9G, this was asked to be put on here by Mr. Jopek, so I refer to him.
Yes, last meeting we had Ben Gauthier was here to talk about the issues with the Little League fields, and I think I wasn't here last year, but it was something to do with funding. They weren't able to renovate the fields like they had intended, and then now there's an increased value where their fundraised amount of money is not going to be sufficient to cover it now. It's grown by, I think, $40,000 or somewhere around that area. So when I spoke to him, I actually ran into him at the Little League field and talked to him and just asked, like, what exactly is what are they looking at doing? What's the value that they're looking for? And what are they really looking for from the city? Unfortunately, he's not here. However, essentially what he wants to do is basically have the fields redone to where they are more suitable. And then I also clarified with them what all are these fields used for? Is it just for Little League, or is it a broader idea? For instance, he said this past weekend, I think it was this past weekend, they hosted the Little League World Series round 1. So all the neighboring cities came here and loads of kids came to play baseball, which is great. And so it's used to that extent. And it's possibly used for other things as well. And so I asked him kind of what the value is he's looking for, like what can we contribute? And he said $30,000 would get them over the line to finish the project. I think it was like $140,000 project, and they fundraised most of it. Obviously, I made no promises, but I just said I'll make sure it gets on the agenda that we discuss it to see if we can do something to help. He said they've had something like 300 kids sign up for Little League Baseball, and it's another one of those things where, how committed are we to, the youth of the city and the programs that we offer? And so that's basically what I wanted to share.
Daniel, I'll make a motion to direct administration to work with the Hodag Little League group for details on the renovation project to see how much they are seeking and exactly what that money would be used for.
Michalowski, second.
So I'm not going to actually acknowledge those because it's discuss only. We're not taking action tonight. So, but I mean, it's still a motion when we only promote it to the public that it's a discussion only.
I believe as a point of order here that anything on the agenda can be acted upon.
Mr. Attorney?
Anything can be enacted.
It's an interesting question. It's noted on the agenda under number 9, which says discussion and action items. It certainly allows you to take an action item of the nature that was proposed, which simply says, tell the administration to go get some facts. That really is more of an expression of the desire of the council for further information than a real action item where you're expending money or you're really doing something. So I don't think it's out of place. I would be concerned if the agenda had not noted that you were going to vote on an expenditure for an item and it wasn't listed as an expenditure of city funds or time for a certain project. Then I think it really has to say we're going to take action, which you have now discussion and approval. But simply to say to the administration to go look into this, I don't find a real conflict with that.
Okay, that was just from the point of public knowledge kind of a thing. So any further discussion after the motion second? Not seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. 9H. So this is the accommodation tax. I refer to Zach.
Yeah, the ordinance, as a follow-up to the work session that was held on this topic, is in your packets. There was also an attachment that we had received, I think Steve had shared it actually, which somewhat clearly and plainly articulates the difference between the room tax commission and a room tax tourism zone. Our ordinance, I would express as somewhat of a hybrid, and I think if there's clarity in the way the city executes its room tax offering, it would be done through the ordinance. I know there's been some talk about a contract, of which, yes, the city could enter into a contract with an entity as well, though the ordinance is one of such places at which this issue is expressed and discussed. So wanted to refocus at least your attention on what's in the ordinance today. I think by and large, it's currently being followed, which is always a concern I have with our ordinances, if we've got them, that we're following them. So that is a positive, though, as I shared, and Steve could maybe articulate this, but there are, know that there are alternatives to this, and that's also part of the discussion, I believe, at this stage, from what I've understood, some of the questioning that's come through the work session or from individually from you guys since some of that discussion.
Well, since they said your name a lot, Steve, what's your opinion on it?
I think that Zach is absolutely correct in everything he said about what I said. No, the point is, three things I would point out. Number one is a lot of people don't know that the ordinance refers to an accommodation tax, which is discussed often as a room tax, but statutorily it's an accommodation tax because it's for accommodations that are being taxed. So and so that's why there's some discrepancy and some misunderstanding amongst people. Number two, the creation of a district is one thing. The creation of a commission is something else. A district means you can have the city be a district. You can have the city plus a town be a district. You can have a city plus a town be a district. You could have two towns being a district. So that's the creation of a district. That is an intergovernmental agreement between entities saying that they want to work together as a district, and that's a tourism district. And as a tourism district, that means you combine your accommodation tax money to promote the district. And again, there's some misunderstanding that if I create a district, am I creating a commission? And the answer is no. You create the district and then you create the commission, which the commission then is the responsible party to monitor the funds that are collected within the district. And what we talked about is who becomes the collector of the funds. And in some communities, that collector of the funds is generally a city. I mean, even if you have townships involved, because the city has a better mechanism for collecting money than most towns do. In other words, they have a finance director, they have a methodology for keeping track of that. So generally, when you create a a district, a tourism district, you'll have the city collect the money, and then they take out of the percentage, which is a 30%, they would take that to administer their collection process and their management process. Then you look at the 70%, and the 70% under state law has to be administered by a committee or a commission. The city of Rhinelander, under the commission or the district which they created with the town of Pelican, had created what was called a Rhinelander Tourism Marketing Committee, and it gave the responsibility to the committee to administer the funds. In other words, that becomes your administrative body that technically is there to decide how that 70% is expended. You can also create, and this is where I guess my preference would fall, you can create a commission. And a commission is an entity that would be created that would have involvement from the city and from the town that's involved, or towns that may be involved. And then it's required by statute to also involve a representative of the housing, transient housing, which is motel, hotel, community, has to be on the board. That's required by state statute. If you look at the taxation commission, and the purpose of the commission then would have the city, would have the town, would have this representative from the tourism industry, motel, it's lodging. It has to be somebody from a lodging type. It can be an RV, it could be it could be an Airbnb, it could be a resort, it could be a motel. Generally, it's a motel type facility, because those are the people whose money is being collected, and that's why generally they have a right. Then they look at applications and they decide, the commission decides who gets the money. So you may have the fair come to that commission and say, we'd like so much money. You may have the golf course come to that. But everybody has to come to that commission with a project on how the money is going to be spent, and it has to be spent to promote the area that's included in the tourism district, and it has to promote tourism in that district. It can't be used for administrative expenses. It can't be used for like a person who is technically a clerk or somebody who has a different position. It has to be used for marketing, and it has to be used for tourism. And generally the commission then looks at all the applications of all the interested groups that are involved in marketing, the groups that are involved in promoting the area. Now that's generally the role of the commission. Again, the city of Rhinelander elected to create a marketing committee, and you can see the membership on the statute says who's the members of the committee. And then that committee has, in the past, in the city of Rhinelander, entered into a contract with the Chamber of Commerce and said to the chamber, you manage the money, and you cover the expenditures, and the committee can give you advice and counsel, but basically the spending of the 70% has been left up by contract with the chamber. And so the mayor wanted to review this and talk about the different ways you could do that. And so that's why it's here for your discussion and review. But what you really want to look at is, number one, the city's responsibility to collect the money, and the city's responsibility, along with the town of Pelican and along with somebody representing the lodging industry, on how the money is spent and the various entities that are spending the money. And that should be a controlled system where you have control over the money, how it's being spent, that you have a reporting so that it comes back and you know it was spent and how it was spent. And then also you want to measure, somehow you want to create a measurement as to whether or not there was an impact by the project. In other words, there should be goals and objectives for every project, and then the person or the entity, whether it's the golf course or the chamber or whomever it is, should be reporting back to you saying, you gave us $7,000, we used the $7,000 for a social media, and we brought in 5 new people that never would have been here before. And again, I'm not a marketing specialist, so I'm not going to pretend on what the goals and objectives are. I simply know the systems and the different systems throughout the state of Wisconsin that exist under the state statute. And I can talk about this statute all day long if you want me to, because several communities I've worked in do it entirely differently than Rhinelander does it, but Rhinelander is a way that's being done. So Does that answer your question, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I have one more, and I just kind of clicked now. So we set up by ordinance a committee to decide how this money is spent. That
Correct.
committee then partners with the chamber and other nonprofits in our community to spend that.
Right.
So what's the value of then the chamber coming back to council saying we want to spend out of the money you give us so much for our chamber center, so much for grants, so much for that? That seems to be more that committee's discretion versus council's discretion.
The council cannot decide how to spend the money. The council can only decide who's on the commission, and the commission then decides how the money is being spent. The council, however, has the responsibility to review how it's being spent and to make sure that it's being spent correctly and appropriately.
So hypothetically, a contract regarding this to common council is not appropriate or irrelevant on any means. It should be a contract with whoever with this committee, not common council.
Correct. The Rhinelander Tourism Marketing Committee, which is a committee of the city council and the town of Pelican,
Correct.
under this ordinance, and I presume Pelican has one that matches this, that's who should be deciding where the money goes. Correct.
Okay.
Now, they could say, we've got a check here for $120,000, we're going to give it all to the chamber. They could do that, but that committee has to make that decision.
Mr. Barnett? Oh, Lauren?
Lauren has her hand up.
I just wanted to offer just a couple other, my understanding, which certainly isn't a legal background at all. We've talked about the development of a zone in the past with the town of Pelican. And from my understanding, a zone, you would have to collect the exact same amount. Does that sound right, Steve? Like, percentage-wise, they would also have to collect the same amount of accommodation tax?
Yeah, effectively, what's existing here, but it's through agreement with the town of Pelican. You've created a zone. You've created a zone that is the city of Rhinelander and the town of Pelican.
Okay.
I mean, you haven't officially created a zone under the statute, but by agreement, a zone generally, for example, we set one up not too long ago in Wapaka, and there's like 3 townships and a city and a village. They're all in one tourism zone, and then they created their commission, and their commission then manages the money, but the city of Wapaka collects the 30% because they do all the administration. They collect all, just like we do, the city of Rhinelander. They're the ones that do all of the monetary aspects of it and the management of the money.
Okay, so then the difference there would be that Pelican still is collecting and doing the administration of their own at this point in time, to my knowledge. I also just wanted to mention the Rhinelander Tourism and Marketing Committee does tell us how to spend the money. Like, we propose a budget to the Tourism and Marketing Committee every October or so, although I think to make it more in line with city budget, maybe we should move that time to August, just so it makes, we would propose budget cycle in August, and then it just flows better in terms of budget cycles. But we'd propose it to the Rhinelander Tourism and Marketing Committee, and then they tell us how to spend those dollars. It was just something that stuck out in my mind, is wanting to make that clarification that we aren't just expending the dollars, we are budgeting for and pre-approving these expenditures through the Tourism and Marketing Committee. I guess it's just a point of clarification on my end.
A question I would have for you as a representative of the chamber as well. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your role as a chamber versus, well, with or without, this committee? Is it more of the committee's contracting with you guys, or is it more a partnership? Is it more, I'm just trying to figure out the two entities, how they mesh together.
I guess hearing the more in-depth descriptions, it's essentially that we are contracting with the Tourism and Marketing Committee, although maybe we haven't been doing that formally correct, so we've been going straight to the municipality. Maybe it should be more so contracting with the Tourism and Marketing Committee. But historically, we are doing the work on their behalf, although it's just been contracted essentially with the municipalities versus that committee.
Do you see it as a conflict of interest as representing the chamber having a voting member, or actually two on that committee?
I guess I'm not sure. Maybe it's more of a ex officio position as we're executing the work versus voting. But there are other instances, I think, where there may be voting positions like that. I mean, we are helping to guide and direct this committee as to marketing avenues, where we can spend this dollar. I will say, from my standpoint, I have never actually voted on anything at that committee level, as I'm the one presenting and sharing the information, and I'm taking the notes. I have never actually voted on any of those items. I just essentially serve as coordinator, if that makes sense.
So, at least from my opinion, I think we have ordinance cleaning up at a minimum, because per our ordinance, it's showing the chamber director as well as the chamber president or other officer has a vote, and DRI, which that's a whole nother discussion. But I mean,
yeah, we had worked through a little bit before and started to draft some changes, which can certainly be further looked at. We thought about adding someone from a sports outdoor rec background, as well as maybe just general hospitality. There are a couple hotel properties, both via Rhinelander and Pelican, that are currently on the committee, but we talked about adding in hospitality in general. Maybe that's a restaurant or a business that serves the tourism industry as well.
To your knowledge, just because it's not specific in the ordinance, is there any kind of term limits for, the facility managers or local lodging?
I believe it is in the ordinance somewhere. 3-year terms, I believe, is what I had seen in the past. Although, based on previous interest of those involved, it's kind of been the same people for a while.
Okay.
But I think that it was 3-year terms.
Mr. Jopek?
Prior to this, like prior to COVID and everything going crazy, was there like a meeting minutes provided, like another board or committee would give to the city council so that we could see like what you guys have in the process? Because for me, the planning session we had was like really cool for me to see what you guys were kind of like, what's coming down the line. And so is that something that has in the past been provided to city council, or is it something, if it isn't, is it something that we could see? I don't want it doesn't have to be excessive, but just to see what your current initiatives are, what your, broadcasted initiatives are, so on and so forth.
I don't know that we ever provided minutes in the past, but we certainly have them and could. But I do think that it's nice to be able to present the information to you guys at least annually, if not more often, to share all the initiatives, like the branding, which I'm really excited about, to be able to share that with everybody on a more regular basis. I used to come to council meetings quite often pre-COVID.
So this question is more directed to council. How do you want us to move forward? I mean, some of this is just cleaning up the language of the ordinance. I think some of it might be saying who's actually a member, might be something we want to look at. I would argue the city has roughly 2 votes when we collect, through the room tax majority of the tax. So it's one of those advice or suggestions of how we should move forward with this ordinance, as well as the bodies on there or terms, all that kind of stuff. Mr. Holt?
Thank you. I think, Stephen's question about how often the council would see anything from this committee or from the chamber. And pre-COVID, I do remember Lauren coming and giving a report generally once a month. And a lot got shut down and a lot of chaos happened in the city immediately prior to everything being shut down. And if there's a need to clean up language in ordinance because we need to be following our ordinances and they need to reflect what are our expectations and goals, right? I'm in favor of that, but what I would be more in favor of immediately would be for us to return to some consistent dialogue communication method that we had prior to the world going crazy, or crazier, and giving it some time to rebuild that relationship before we start making changes. That's kind of putting the cart before the horse, I think. So I would want to stay, rebuild that consistent communication for now.
Okay, Mr. Anderson?
I tend to agree with what David just said. All that I'm hearing as far as the problem we're having, if we want to solve a problem, what's the problem? Isn't clear other than the lack of communication back and forth. Sounds like we need an improvement there, but other than that, I'm not really hearing what kind of problems we've been having with the operation under this system.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I think the issue that, at least from an administrative point of view, that concerns us is that there are many entities that may want access to the money than just the chamber. I mean, there's groups that promote, for example, the golf course, that promote the area and would fall within that category. And so I think what the issue becomes is, should this entity that is the commission be more independent, so that it's not just controlled by the Rhinelander Chamber, but it's controlled by a commission that represents other than the chamber, so that you get a broader spectrum. I think that's the issue that, if you look at it statutorily, is because if you have two members of the chamber, which is what this says in our ordinance, you've got two people on the committee that are spending the money who are also voting, and that was the dialogue that we're worried about. If you remove the chamber from membership and you simply go back to what the statute requires on a commission, and the commission would require that the city have representation, that the town have representation, and that the lodging industry have representation, and there's no mention of chambers or any other groups, then you can take away some of that concern over how the money is being used, or is there one group being favored over another. That was the concern that really was expressed. Now, that's up to you to decide what you want to do, don't get me wrong. I'm just telling you what brought the topic up.
Ms. Michalowski, just because you're first.
So I guess I'm a little confused as to, I mean, I understand what you're saying about what brought it up, but I haven't noticed that the chamber not doing their job in executing, spending the money appropriately. Second point is, they used to be on our agenda to give updates pre-COVID. They're no longer on our agenda. And I think that that's one of the issues that I have. And I think the communication between the two entities needs to occur. And
well, but you're mixing two. The chamber is entirely separate from the city.
I agree.
The chamber is entirely separate from the room tax commission, or the accommodation tax commission. The commission should be reporting to you, not the chamber. The commission should be reporting to you, not the chamber. The chamber should be reporting to you on chamber activities, just like the
Pioneer
museum reports to you. We haven't heard from the museum or Pioneer, whatever, and I'm not saying we need to bring them in, but, you know, I'm just so you're looking at the right body. This is like the library board coming to report to you. This would be the commission coming to report to you, not the Chamber of Commerce. You understand?
But it's my understanding that the chamber is the entity that is running or taking care of the finances of that commission.
No, you got that totally wrong. We had a contract that's expired with the chamber. Okay? The commission had a contract with the chamber. That'll be over with. Either it's over now or...
To do
over
what,
this-
though? Has a contract with the chamber to do what?
To manage the funds.
Okay, and
That
so
was a
that's
contract
what,
that was a contract that I remember, Zach, you and I signed a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago.
1 year extension.
Yeah. Before that, I think, well, some of you that'll go back that far, David, I guess you might be the only one, or maybe Tom. In the Daniel Gill day, we were going and looking at a brand-new contract and a whole new system. We had elaborate discussions going on, but that was about the same time as we had investigators come into City Hall, and so that kind of took a back seat to everything. It's just that it's now cycling up again. And I don't have any problem if you legally want to go back to a contract. My job is to tell you what the law says, and you can decide what you want to do. I'm just trying to point out why we're bringing this topic up. So there's not a misunderstanding that somehow the chamber is the entity. The chamber is not the entity. The Room Tax Commission is the entity.
Mr. Jopek, I think, had his hand up first, and then Holt, and then it's back this way.
I'll pass to Mr. Holt.
I had my hand up too.
I will yield my time to Mr. Barnett.
So
Hi.
I guess my question would be, if part of the argument is that people are saying that they're unsure of if the chamber or the commission is being unfair about who they're doling the money out to, I mean, we're putting our faith in the city to do that. I mean, it's apples to oranges for me. It's, who's to say the city doesn't favor, let's say, the golf course? Just saying.
True. Mr. Anderson?
I have two questions. One is for Mr. Sorensen. Are there other cities that have the Chamber of Commerce involved in a way similar to what we have? And the other question is, if you look down in page 47, paragraph 3B at the end, it talks about the Rhinelander Chamber of Commerce as administrator for the Rhinelander Tourism Marketing Committee. It seems like there's a little more here than just a contract, that the ordinance requires that as well.
I'm only speaking if I'm required to. I mean,
Well, he did ask you a direct question.
okay, the number one question, the answer is, well, I got to go back to the comment that Tom made too. Remember, the city council cannot make decisions as to where the money goes. That's number one. That the statute strictly prohibits that. So you can't decide that it's the chamber. You can't decide. That's what we talked about, cleaning up the ordinance. This ordinance suggests that you can choose who's going to do that. You can't do that under the statute. That's the thing that I pointed out. The statute says you can set up a commission, In this case, you call it a committee, that's just semantics. But it doesn't give you the authority, meaning the city council, to say who's going to manage the money and how it's going to be managed. That's up to the commission to do that. The statute is very clear that you separate the room tax money from the politics of city councils. That's why it was done that way. It's supposed to be separated out. So the commission is supposed to represent the city, it's supposed to represent any towns, it's supposed to represent the lodging industry. That's what it's supposed to represent. And then that commission goes out and hires who the administrator is. That's one of the provisions we should clean up, because otherwise our ordinance does not, fall in step with the state statute. I didn't write this ordinance, so I hope that answers your question, Cheryl.
Well, not totally, because if I take you literally on that, then the city doesn't have the ability to spell out anything that's in that paragraph 3B, like 30% to the city, 40% for this, 17% for that, 8% for the other thing. Are you saying the city does not, under the statute, have authority to do that?
That's correct. Only the commission does.
Mr.
The
Holt?
30/70 is by statute. That says the maximum that a city can take is 30% for administration. They can take less if they want.
Or the commission could decide we get less.
Gerald, you got to get closer to the mic, and
Does that mean the commission could decide that we get less? If we had a commission?
No, the statute says the city can take up to 30%. So the city gets to decide that when they create the commission.
Mr. Holt?
I think that this requires a work session for a couple reasons. First, to make sure that the council here is on the same page about what needs to happen, because I'm sensing some confusion. We've got an ordinance that needs just a little bit.
Just a little? Good.
Just a smudge. So from my understanding, the ordinance needs to be cleaned up. But then second is that we have an expired contract, which means we need to decide as a council how we're going to organize that committee / commission, whatever word we want to use for it. Because that's what the obligation of the council is to set that up and decide who's on that. And then that commission or committee starts to make the decisions that are within their purview per ordinance, per statute, right? So I think that's how I'm reading this right now. We can continue to discuss it tonight, but I think a work session allows us to create an agenda that is very specific to talking about that. It lays the parameters out clearly. And I'm not sure if anybody else agrees with me here, but it sounds like we need to actually sit down with where that is the sole agenda item.
I would agree with that. The only thing, I think your second bullet point is the first bullet point, because really council doesn't have a contract. They have this commission that then dictates everything from there.
Right.
So your second bullet point, I think, is...
Okay, so we need to clear up the ordinance.
Yeah, my argument...
And then after we pass a new ordinance or a revised ordinance, then we would be setting up a new commission.
Correct, and then city's done at this level, just, making sure attorney's happy. But I would almost, just based on what I'm hearing tonight, the contracts we had in the past were not appropriate. It'd be kind of like us having a contract saying, hey, library, you have to have this company clean. Library doesn't have to have that. So it's, I think, operation, at least up to whenever the contract expired, was not correct. I mean,
well, yeah,
we pay a lot. Do you agree?
There was a legitimate committee set up by the ordinance. That committee entered into a contract with the Chamber of Commerce. That's all legal. I'm just telling you that the ordinance should be cleaned up a bit, because the ordinance isn't the way it operated. The way it operated is the committee retained the chamber, and the chamber and the committee worked together to do the projects. And all I'm saying to you is, why don't we get the ordinance that fits the statute, and then you guys can have this discussion that David wants to have. All I care is that you're legal, that, you know, and I think there's a misunderstanding on two folds. One is that somehow the council can decide, well, I think we should give some money to Little League. I think we should give some money to the Hodag Dome. I think we should give money to the restaurants. I mean, you can't do that, you know.
I'd like to know where that came from, because I don't think that's the case at all from us. No one here said that we should be able to dole out where the money goes, so I disagree with that.
Well, okay, but let's clear it up. Tom.
No, you put it out there like that's what we're doing, and that's not what we're doing. So I want to make it clear that the council does not feel that way.
Tom, the ordinance says that. That's what I'm trying to get rid of, right, Gerald?
I'm not sure it's the same thing.
But it's not.
It's saying that certain money goes to certain things. You want to get that out of the ordinance.
It doesn't say what things it goes to.
No, but
it says what type of things.
Right. And you can't do that. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Mr. Jopek?
All right. So it just sounds like there's a lot of breaks in communication. So I would say we should go with what Mr. Holt has said for establishing a work session to review the ordinance specifically, who is on this commission, and then sort it out through there. Because now what we're doing is we're spitting our tires in the mud, and we're all getting irritated. And I guess I don't know if it's my place to say, but I want to affirm what Lauren had said about adding somebody to the committee from other departments, other parts of the city, and make sure that it's, you know, not somehow some target on the chamber in that regard. I just think it's clearly there's some confusion here, and so let's just chalk it up to we need to have a work session where we specifically read through the ordinance, make sure it's cleaned up so that the committee is ready to go, and then we can move on to the next thing.
Mr. Holt?
Yeah, I agree. I want to clarify or stipulate that cleaning up the ordinance can be done in terms of bringing it in line with statute. Can be done by the administration, by the three of you. In the past, my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that that's what has happened with other ordinances. That it's not that the whole entire council discusses them, it's that the city administrator, the mayor, and the city attorney work out the language of an ordinance so that it is in line with state statute, so that it's legally proper. And then in terms of setting up the commission, that comes after that. So the work session would come after the cleaning up of the ordinance. Do you need a motion to direct city administration to work on the language of the ordinance? Is that?
Yeah, if there's some specific areas you want us, I heard statute. I've also heard some things on representation. I think there's some healthy reasons why you can't have a contract, the group can't have a contract with its administrator and have them vote. I mean, that is pretty obvious to me. So I think I've got a bit of direction to take a stab at some of this, but I think I'd prefer it to be in a motion.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily administration that's advocating, you know, for a change. We're having a candid dialogue about some inconsistencies and some issues that need to be cleaned up.
Then I will make a motion to direct city administration to clean up the ordinance, and I would invite council members with haste to read through that ordinance and provide input in a timely manner, like between now and next meeting. If they have anything that they have concern with, what direction? Because I can't speak for anybody else, but that's going to take me a little bit of time.
Second.
Thank you, Eileen,
You're welcome.
Madam President.
Not seeing any discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Okay. 9I. Refer to Zach. My understanding, this is an IT project regarding City Hall that's been added to scope of the IT consolidation.
Partially. There are two additional components. The mayor referenced one component being here at City Hall. As you know, we're marching through the IT consolidation project, making some good progress. In fact, another milestone this weekend to get all on one set of servers, backing up, all that good stuff. But one of the components to this is the building access systems that are currently in place at the police and fire departments. It's my understanding that the new server and the new software, the current software would be incompatible or create some challenges. So we did solicit two quotes for the same scope, and Permar was the most cost effective. They're also our current vendor. They would be the lower responsible respondent, both in price but also in our understanding of the system. And then there's some minor changes at both police and fire with some of the door location and access now that inspections has moved out of the fire department, and then as well as maintaining the public access to the dispatch phone and some other parts and pieces. So where the funding source of this is the borrowing, the IT consolidation borrowing, and that's the scope that we're recommending at this time.
Daniel, make a motion to approve the proposal from Permar for building access systems not to exceed $22,175 as part of the IT consolidation project.
Anderson, second.
Any discussion? Not seeing any. Clerk, take the roll call.
David Holt,
Aye.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek,
Aye.
Carrie Mikulowski,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Leanne Felton,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to 10. Motion to accept. Anyone?
I'll make a motion to accept the monthly reports from departments as presented.
Holt, second.
Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. I would entertain a motion to go into closed session.
It must be read, sir.
They have to read it, yeah.
Yeah, you have to read it.
I would entertain.
Oh.
Oh, good grief. I'll make a motion to go into closed session. If necessary, convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute Section 19.851 sub CG, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. A, discuss parameters for a developer's agreement. B, discuss litigation in which the city is or may become involved in. And C, it says A, but C, discuss status of negotiations with the Rhinelander Professional Police Association Local 38.
Hold a second. No, you read it. You didn't give me an option. I was about to read it.
Clerk, take the roll call.
Leanne Felton,
Aye.
Stephen Jopek,
Aye.
Eileen Daniel,
Aye.
Thomas Kelly,
Aye.
Gerald Anderson,
Aye.
David Holt,
I
Thomas Barnett,
Aye.
Carrie Mikulowski.
Aye.
Motion approved to go into closed session.
Left is.
Apparently, but I don't remember every day. Okay. It is 8:18. We're coming back from closed session with nothing to report. Any future agenda item requests? Not seeing any. It is 8:19. Meeting adjourned.